and sharing Southern Chapter best practices. We're going to continue to conduct the chapter meetings online as it's not possible at present to run in-person events for the time being. We're also welcoming our Cyber Ireland members from outside of the South Chapter for today's meeting. This is one of the benefits, I suppose, of running meetings online. I think we have a really interesting topic and speakers, which have been organised by Emer O'Neill, the Global Security Response Senior Manager at VMware, and is one of the South Chapter leads. So the topic where this actually came from was the South Chapter launch that took place in Cork in February of this year, which seems like another lifetime ago now. After that meeting, there was discussions around what the opportunities are for the South Chapter and what challenges should be the focus of the group. A key strength that was identified was the number of companies with security operation centres and companies who are utilising threat intelligence platforms in the region. So the question was posed, how can we improve threat intelligence and sharing between members of Cyber Ireland? So identifying threat intel and sharing as a focus area, the chapter leads propose we explore this opportunity for companies to support each other in building up their own threat intel platforms, sharing knowledge and best practices, and connecting with organisations maybe that are outside of their industry verticals as well, to develop a forum possibly to achieve this. The first step is the organisation of this initial meeting to actually explore what are some best practices on how chapter members are both gathering threat intel and how they approach sharing or accessing that intelligence. And this is going to be followed up today by a discussion on the potential need for and the benefits of a threat intel sharing group as part of Cyber Ireland. So some of the questions that we might explore are around what can we share that's of value to organisations, and maybe what are some of the challenges around threat intel and sharing, and should we create a forum that can facilitate this sharing of information and best practices. We've purposely given a bit more time for discussions today as we want to move away from these online meetings where it's only presentations to ones where the audience questions.
You're on mute, Owen.
Sorry. If you have any questions, you can use the chat feature and we'll come to you during the discussions. But I'd also like to encourage you to contribute to the discussions with your own experiences and perspectives as well. If you'd like to contribute, just drop a note in the chat box and Andy will call you out during the discussions and the Q&A. So that's why we're using a Zoom meeting to allow that kind of a bit more informality and for participation from the attendees as well. We just ask that you keep your microphone on mute during the presentations, please. And just to note as well that the meeting is going to be recorded, but we won't be recording the discussion and the Q&A. So I'm going to pass it over to Emer now to introduce the speakers and to kick off the meeting. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Owen. Good morning, all. I suppose just to begin, to kick this off, I would like to share some background on the topic of threat intelligence. So threat intelligence is becoming more important, as we all know, for organizations and a fundamental element of cybersecurity programs. Whether organizations have a full threat intelligence team, ingest threat feeds, or simply leverage threat intelligence features found in common security tools, they're now benefiting from threat intelligence in one way or another. Looking at the 2019 Ponemon Study, the value of threat intelligence, this indicates that 85% of organizations consider threat intelligence critical to achieving a strong security posture. So as corresponding to the increase in the use of threat intelligence has been an increase in sharing threat intelligence between organizations. Industry-centric sharing initiatives like ISACs, information sharing and analysis centers, and other industry sharing organizations have led to a dramatic increase in the sharing of threat intelligence. Additionally, we have government-led initiatives which have encouraged sharing partnerships between governments and private organizations. European legislations like the NIS Directive and the Cybersecurity Act support the creation of these sectoral ISACs and PPPs, or public-private partnerships, within the EU. I suppose, however, the key challenge, even with the relative popularity of these sharing initiatives, is that organizations are mostly focused on consuming what is shared instead of adding their own contributions. So the South Chapter proposes to explore the needs of industries for a regional threat intelligence forum. This type forum could include like examples of maybe custom or bespoke developed solutions being used to gather threat intel, present the commercial threat intel platforms and how they are used, look at examples of using machine learning or artificial intelligence to gather threat intel, what information resources are used to stay current on threat intel, and then what organizations that members are involved with for threat intel sharing, such as maybe HISAC, FIRST or FISAC. Also looking at threat intel from both a hardware, software perspective, and then finally, what are the needs of the different sectors? So to take this forward today, we have 3 speakers who will share some insight into an overview of their experience in gathering threat intel, followed on by an open discussion where, as Owen mentioned, we'd like to have some participation from the audience. So to kick this off, let me introduce our speakers and our host for the open discussion. First speaker will be Ken Musat. Ken is a security response engineer in the VMware Security Response Center since 2017. His range of work goes from daily technical PCERT duties to the development of internal tools. He holds a master's degree in computer science from Griffith College Dublin and another in engineering specialised in big data and IoT from the Paris Graduate School of Engineering. Following on from Ken, we have Dr. Alil Mahdi. Dr. Mahdi is a secure lab lead at Qualcomm, where he leads the hardware penetration testing, vulnerability research and chip certification activities. Dr. Mahdi has more than 9 years experience in the domain of cybersecurity and product security. His experience was gained from multiple industrial and academic application domains such as chip design, critical infrastructure, aerospace and defense. Dr. Mahdi has received his PhD degree from UCC in 2012 and his MSc degree from the University of Lugano in 2008 and has multiple cybersecurity certifications. He has a strong research interest and professional skills in hardware attacks, cybersecurity, embedded system security, cyber-physical security, cyber-physical system design, model-based design, system-on-chip, and data analytics. He has an academic engagement as a visiting lecturer, conference and journal reviewer, advisory board member, and has published 38 peer-reviewed scientific papers, journals, and also has 3 patents. So following on from Dr. Mahdi, we'll have Jackie Fox. Jackie leads Accenture's security business in Ireland and has just over 20 years experience in technology and cybersecurity consulting. She holds an MSc in Digital Investigations and Forensic Computing and a GCFA and a GICSP. She has worked across multiple industry sectors and specializes in helping organizations to understand and treat their cyber risk. Jackie has had the experience of investigating many large and small-scale national and international breaches. She's also the Vice Chair on the Board of Cyber Ireland and is an adjunct lecturer for UCD on their MSc in Forensics and Security. In 2018, she was awarded Security Champion of the Year in Ireland for her contribution to the Irish security industry and her mentorship and encouragement of women in security. And finally, we'll have Andy Grez facilitating the discussion. Andy is an experienced Chief Technology Officer with a passion for cybersecurity. In his role at SmartTech 247, Andy leads the delivery of next-generation cyber defense technologies and services to global enterprise customers. Andy dedicated the last 7 years of his 20-year IT tenure to cybersecurity, advising clients and peers on policy, technology, trends, and architecture associated with security. He firmly believes that we should share our knowledge and expertise and provide our customers with the very best in threat intelligence, detection, and response. He's an advocate for giving back to the industry and developing tomorrow's cybersecurity experts. So, without further ado, let me hand over to our first speaker, Ken Musat, to speak about gathering threat intel at VMware. Over to you, Ken.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks to you for having me on Cyber Island. Very happy to be here. So my presentation will be about product security and threat intelligence. So that's something a little bit more different than what you would get within your production environment and infrastructure. So I'll just give first a little insight on what we do as a response team. Basically, we get vulnerability reports from customers or security researchers. We triage and investigate the issue. We manage this with our various development teams, and we try to resolve and mitigate the issue, upon which we release an advisory. You might all have seen, maybe if you're using VMware, the VMware security advisories on our website. So from that point, we're just only reacting to threats, but even in the reaction, even during the reaction, we still have to be aware of different things. So, and how to protect our products and inform our development teams in time and not just before the next release. So with that in mind, it is really important to know your products and understand them. Because if you don't know how they work, you can't really anticipate on what's coming next. So there are multiple things to keep in mind. First is knowing all your components, your architecture of your products, how they interact with each other. So it's basically something similar to threat modeling. Next thing you also should be aware is open source softwares, because your products might be using them. It's also a place where community shares code, and it's not always as up to date and not always as secure as one might think. So you need to be aware of what's in there. And the next thing is also know your code base. So what I mean by that is that maybe some large organizations might acquire some smaller companies, and they might have different CVS. Some might be using GitLab, some might be using Stash. So you need to be able to talk with your development teams and know exactly where to find information that is relevant to the products you are treating and handling. So when you first want to build your threat intelligence, you need to think about data quality. If you wish to stay ahead of CVEs impacting your products or use specific data for your metrics, choosing where it comes from is important. You can't take any information out of the web and use it. It has to be also specific to the kind of products that you're using. And you also need some reliable sources like, for example, the NVD, National Vulnerability Database, Mitre. All of those can provide you with a sense of consistency in the information, and something that you can easily use even for automation or even any bespoke products for threat intelligence that you want to use. The next step would be to think about metrics. Each organization will use different metrics depending on the needs. But if you desire to gather data and track incoming issues, make sure you capture all the data you can. Even what you don't consider important right now, it can be later on. So let's say that for the time being, we don't necessarily need to capture CWE data on issues because we don't have the need for it right now. But maybe later on, that's something where you're going to think, oh, okay, maybe if I had this data, maybe I could come to some conclusion and help anticipate future issues. So always gather as many data as you can. And especially if you're trying to include machine learning and automation later on, the more data or columns that you have, the better it is. So within VMware, we are using a custom-made tool called Gnosis. So in Greek, it means knowledge. So we've had some very specific needs at VMware. We have multiple products using different open source softwares, and sometimes those OSS are shared between products. And it was important for us 3 years ago to find a way to link this information between the products. So it worked quite well, and other needs arose, and we decided to add CV news and include that into the automation of finding those links. So that way we get an early notification on which products might be or might not be affected by a new issue. Then in 2018, we decided to go a step further and add comparison between products based on versions and all the previous data that we had. Then after that, we decided to add more analytics, charts, statistics, being able to search bugs based on the OSS and product comparison and CV news within our bug tracking system inside VMware. We also have an automatic bug creation based on OSS alerts, from which we can automatically create cases that are directly sent to us and then the development teams. And finally, we also have an email notification alerting us of any new possible sensible issues or new CVEs that might be linked to a product or open source softwares. This helps us to stay on top of issues. So this was very crude at the start, and now in 2018 we've just revamped our UI so that way it's usable for everybody. Now we have projects to include machine learning in this, but this is still in the planning phase. So we have a very succinct demonstration video here. Obviously, we can't show everything for security reasons, but it will show you basically what it looks like essentially. So here on the homepage, you just have the list of all our open source softwares, which version they're on, if there are any CVEs linked to it. This helps us to get visualized information on this. Then we have here our comparison tool. Can't show it exactly what it does here. Then we have here our email notification program, where we're able to send information based on CVSS metrics and information based on Bugzilla, which is the bug tracker software that we use. Then we also have open source software that we use the most. So we have a top 15. Some open source softwares like GRE or OpenStruts or Apache Struts are used quite often across our products. So having the information readily available is necessary. Then we have newsfeed based on CVEs and products. And we also have a list of bugs, so of cases that have been opened based on our automation program. So we can see here that we have a couple of CVEs that are related to our products, and therefore we've opened some cases for our engineers to work on. So that's pretty much what the tool is. We have other items in terms of analytics and bug creation, but we can't really show that to you here. So what are the challenges for in-house solutions? Well, what I would say is not really talk much more about the challenges, but more of the things to do. If you have a current process in terms of gathering intelligence and handling security cases within your response team or your security development lifecycle team, don't change the process altogether. Just add gradual improvements. And after that, you will be able to get a proper, fully global intelligence solution. Now, if you already have an automation platform, you can add a custom-made tools on top of it. Now, just beware that custom-made tools are not, essential. They're not necessary. There are, especially if the need don't arise in your organization. So it's not a default solution. There are plenty of already existing solutions that you can use. Just make sure that it answers the need that you have within your organization. And at last, we have make sure that you prepare your metrics and catalog data, especially if you're planning to include machine learning later on. It's not on the day that you want to do it that you will be able to do it necessarily. So try to plan ahead, sufficiently ahead to make that happen when you need it. All right. Thank you everyone for listening in and for having me. And I will now give the speech to someone else.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. That was very insightful. Thank you for sharing that overview with the audience here. Okay, next up, we're going to hand over to Dr. Ali Mahdi to share his presentation around gathering threat intel from more of a hardware security perspective. Over to you, Ali.
Thank you. Okay, so I think I'm sharing my screen. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, so we are going to change maybe the gears a little bit here. So we are going to talk about the hardware security and how the threat intelligence is just taking over and growing in this domain. And that is mainly the agenda that I'm going to cover in these 10 minutes. But let's start first, because it's not really a trivial way to look at the threat intelligence at the hardware side. So I'm going to just give really kind of a little bit of background why that wasn't an important topic in the past, and how that evolves, and how Qualcomm and other organizations are taking it into account. And let's agree about terminology here, that when we are talking about hardware, we talk about the chip. So it's this processor that you have it in your mobile, in your laptop, or any other devices. So historically, we can say that, I mean, defense in the chip, it was very important, because I mean that is kind of the root of trust. And that was not really considered as a big deal, that some information can be leaked from the chips because of the high complexity of attacking the chips. It was very cost issue for building an attack station, what we call it attack station, to attack these chips, which can cross, I mean, hundreds of thousands of euros. But recently, we observe, and multiple kind of organizations are observing, that these type of attacks are getting simpler. There are multiple kind of modern simplifying the complexity of the attack. The enabler equipments to attack these chips are getting really easy. And the main issue here, that the investment from the attackers to attack these chips are increasing, because the scalability and the impact of harming the market here, it's really high, for a simple reason that it's mass production. Like, if you succeed to attack one chip, you are impacting, I mean, even millions of chips. So, and then the market now is getting in a different kind of perspective, to ask us to certify the chips that it's not vulnerable. So now we need to deal with what we call it certification level. One of them, it's a common criteria certification level. That is the most kind of, I would say, recognized nowadays. And actually what we are doing, we are evaluating the chip resiliencies against multiple kind of advanced and common attacks. And then based on the level of these type of attacks, then we can get the level of the certification. And the level of the attacks is kind of evaluated based on multi-criteria of risk assessment, considering the knowledge that the attacker he needs to know about the chip, the complexity of the attack, the cost of the equipment he needs to use to perform this attack. And here I'm not going to really go in details because of the time, but here what I'm trying to say that these attacks are getting easier, cheaper, and more visible. So since 2017, we are kind of observing one or two kind of complex and really strong attacks are hitting very modern chips and secure chips. And just to imagine that these chips are containing cryptographic keys, passwords, identity, and authentication and authorization information. And leaking this information can really impact all the product line level and the life cycle of the products and the application domain. So the most famous ones that we hear about it start from Spectre, Meltdown, Zombie Load, and Crosstalk. But let me tell you who we are in Qualcomm here. We call ourselves QRed or Qualcomm Red Team. We are building what we call it a secure lab. This secure lab is including hardware security analysts, certification experts, and threat intelligence team. And actually, our mission here is mainly three parts in the secure labs, and that is global-wise. Like we have multiple sites around the globe. We start from the advanced attack exploration, like we try to attack our chips and capture what was the vulnerabilities that we find. The other thing that we need to support the certification bodies, like there are multiple teams and labs that we work with together hand to hand in order to evaluate the chip resiliencies and capture the footprint of these attacks in order to evaluate the attack complexity in the market. And then the third part, which is really important here, that the threat intelligence part. And that is really coming in the picture now very strongly because we need to be really ahead of the curve. So we need to identify what is the upcoming attacks, how the ethical or even black hackers are looking at the chips, and even the research communities, how they are kind of exploring these chips. And the main issue here, and I'm really going to strengthen this different time over this talk, that the timing of performing this attack. Because, I mean, this attack can take really long time and cost a lot of money. And being aware of these type of attacks coming in the future is going to really help us to kind of applying a countermeasures on the chips, because it's not really as immediate as putting a patch in the system and then your system is secure. It's a chip. It's a silicon level. Like when you release this silicon level in the market and there is some issue, then you can just go back and bring all the chips again. So you need really to be ahead of the curve here from the threat intelligence part. So let me just give you two quick snapshots about what type of attacks we are dealing with, because that will help me to conclude about the threat intelligence techniques that we use in Qualcomm and in many other organizations. So I'm going to cover two types of attack, one of them called side channel attacks, and the other one is fault injection. So side channel attacks is mainly leaking kind of unintentional information from any kind of cryptographic execution on the chip, and then use this information, leaked information, to reverse engineer the cryptographic and get the keys or passwords or whatever information that the chip is trying to secure. And this kind of signal or unintentional information leaked can go from the power consumption of the chip, the electromagnetic radiation getting out of the chip, the timing of the response that the chip is taking to respond back to a request. And as you can see here, that is the type of the station that we are using. Like the upper one, it's side channel 3D machine to allocate kind of electromagnetic probe to the chip. And as you can see on these kind of thermal emission image, that we can identify exactly where is the location that execute this cryptographic. And if you see this snapshot signal here, it's just an ES encryption is executed. And if an attacker is capturing this signal, he can get the key. I mean, it looks normal signal. It looks like something like you don't really think about it, why it's important, but it contains a lot of information for an attacker. The other thing, what we call it fault injection. So mainly if you change some kind of bits or registers values in the chip, then you can get more privileges in the chip. You can escape some checkpoints. You can overcome some security points in the chip. So by doing that, we can get kind of a microscopic image of the chip, as you can see on this picture. And then we can shoot laser signal or laser beam signal. We can shoot electromagnetic beam signal in order to change these bits. And then by changing these bits, either you get privilege to access more information and leak more information, or by even introducing faults inside the cryptographic execution, you can reverse back everything back. So it's as complex as this. And that gives us the next question now, like why the threat intelligence wasn't really important in the past. Because simply, first thing that it depends really how the security mechanism is implemented on the chip. And you need really to get a lot of information about it and kind of customize your attack to attack only this chip with this particular implementation. So it's very customized to one particular implementation. In addition to that, in order to replicate this attack, you need a lot of information about how the attacker was implementing the attack, from the equipments he has used, the configuration he has put on the station he used, the way he was and the frequency he was used to kind of talk to the chip and so on. So it's a lot of information dedicated to a particular case. So that was saying, I mean, why shall I be nervous if somebody was discovering this attack on another chip? The other thing that to really recent period that many organizations, they were considering this type of attack as a trade secret. So when you discover it, you don't really talk about it, you don't share it. So that was limiting the threat intelligence kind of effort to spread this news around. So, however, the good news that recently, at least CWE is starting really to take the initiatives and building these database of CVEs and visions about future attacks, which is really good, and we are trying to leverage it. However, in Qualcomm, we are building our own threat intelligence. So that is considered from the forecasting of the attack, like nowadays, for example, and that is not really a secret, that machine learning is used heavily in attacking the chips. So in this case, we need really to build the machine learning capability in our labs in order to be ahead of the curve when something like this is hitting us, or if the certification body is asking us to secure our chips against these type of attacks. The other thing that we need really to monitor many communities and research communities and industrial communities in order to see how they are evolving in this direction. So we need to have a little bit of kind of sense, because these communities are not going to really communicate to us exactly what type of attacks we are going to use. And then the third one is a bug bounty program. Like Qualcomm, we have a program to invite kind of security analysts or attackers to attack our chips. And then my lab and the other labs, we are evaluating this and give awards for this one. So just to conclude here, like we fuse all this information from our team threat intelligence kind of effort, in addition to a lot of working group that Qualcomm is involved in it, and the certification working group and research and the bug program. We fuse all of that to our hardware threat intelligence team, and then we have to evaluate the type of the attack. We have to put a priority for these attacks, putting a roadmap to the lab that what we need to take as initiatives in the future, even we are secure now. But most importantly, we are building what we call it attack catalog. So it's very confidential, unfortunately, it's very confidential information to Qualcomm now, but other organizations, they have their own attack catalog, and some kind of certification and standardization bodies, they have other catalogs. And these catalogs, to some extent, can be shared from other organizations. It's not really a big secret. Maybe the selection of the attacks, that is the secret we have. But we are building this attack catalog as our threat intelligence database. And most importantly here, that this attack catalog need to be updated really frequently, because we are secured against time. So by evolving in the time, these kind of security mechanisms can be easily defeated or need to be updated and so on. I will stop at this stage, and we can discuss more during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahdi. That was really, really interesting, and I'm sure of a lot of value to the audience here. Okay, next up, we're going to hand over to Jackie Fox, who's going to share some insight into gathering threat intel as it relates to industrial control systems, or ICS. Over to you, Jackie. I think you're on mute, Jackie.
Can you hear me okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Great. I'm just wondering, could somebody drive the slides that I shared with you for me?
Sure, I think Owen is on.
Here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Jackie. I'll just get them up now.
Thanks, Owen. While that's happening, I just want to say thanks very much for inviting me to speak to the group here today. And I always feel so sad speaking at these occasions a little bit now, because you just so want to be there in person. It would be so nice. And it's great that you know, that Cyber Ireland and the South Chapter are continuing on doing these meetings despite everything at the moment. So I'm delighted to be here with you all today. Just wish it was in person.
There we go. Can you see that there?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Owen. If you could skip into the next slide there for me, that would be brilliant. It's very rare I let someone drive, actually, when I'm in a car, Owen, so you're being privileged to drive. I'm hoping to share some thoughts with you over the next 10 minutes on industrial control systems, threat intelligence, and it's quite a different world than the normal threat intelligence. And I didn't have the privilege of listening to all the previous speakers, so forgive me if I'm repeating something that people have already gone through. But if I could just draw your attention to the chain at the bottom of the page there about how threat and information turns into threat intelligence. Because clearly there's lots of information around the place that's kind of floating around and that we can pull from different areas together. But it's really only at the point that we apply the analysis to it that makes it relevant to either our region or our organization or the types of equipment that we have, that it turns into threat intelligence and it starts becoming relevant for your organization. And this is particularly apt in industrial control systems because again, typical threat intelligence, it's quite fast moving, you know, it's only relevant for a certain period of time. And I've read some very interesting research that's saying that threat intelligence, there's really a 3 to 5 day lifespan on a lot of typical threat intelligence. However, with industrial control systems, that lifespan is a lot longer because they're larger systems, can often be a little bit more difficult to kind of get into. So the types of vulnerabilities that we're seeing with them, or the methods of getting into them, are slightly different. So it's got a longer lifespan around both the threat information and the threat intelligence that goes through there. So what are the attackers that we see today typically targeting with their kind of, you know, industrial control systems malware that they're trying to get through to? So what we have seen, and a lot of it is proof of concept, but it is becoming a lot more real now, is the cyber physical effect, where an attack is actually conducted on an organization and they're bringing it into the physical realm. Like one of the first attacks that we saw of this nature was Stuxnet, where something actually went into the wild, where the Iranian enrichment centrifuges were actually attacked and the process was spoiled, and the centrifuges were running at the wrong speed and things happened to them and the systems broke. But we've also seen it with all sorts of different mechanisms that we see on ICS systems, where somebody has virtually gone into a system and done something to actually destroy a part of a process or destroy part of the physical equipment that people are using. And this is like seriously like very dangerous. Leave alone does it stop the service being provided if it was electricity or water, but it can actually cause explosions, it can cause all sorts of things, and as I say, there's a lot of proof of concept of this around the place. Also, attackers are trying to just disrupt process, to stop production of electricity, to stop production of medication or pharmaceuticals. And then the other thing, and this is very relevant right at this moment in time, is the stealing of intellectual property and secrets in relation to processes or formulae that might be used. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about activity from pharmaceuticals because of people who are either developing vaccines or developing processes or developing something in relation to that this is clearly very valuable intellectual property. And while this may not be right down in the depths of industrial control systems, once it starts getting into production, it does start become relevant at that point. So a preemptive attacker might be looking at trying to get into either stop production or to look at getting formulae about what they could do to reproduce vaccines at this stage. So who are the attackers that target industrial control systems? So I spoke briefly there about kind of industrial spies who are there trying to gain secrets and gain advantage from other organizations. But in this space, we do see a lot of state actors at play. And it's quite interesting that we're seeing more and more attribution of those actors when they get caught at the moment. Like 5 years ago, you would hear people kind of talking about, somebody from the West or somebody from the East might be all they'd say. Whereas now, the US certainly have been attributing things to different countries and different organizations within different countries. And we've even seen at an EU level a recent paper that actually attributed specific individuals who were working in organizations in both Russia and China were named as being threat actors acting in these kind of spaces. And I suppose it's important to say also at this point, and this is kind of my intro piece really, that the for threat intelligence, there are some issues with people sharing information in this space, because if we don't share, then if one organization gets hit with something, it still may as well be a 0 day when another organization sees it. And that's what the NIS directive, one of the objectives of the NIS directive is to promote information sharing. So that threat information, and as it transfers its way through to threat intelligence, it's very important that people are actually complying and trying to share, because it's all well and good being a consumer of threat intelligence, but you need to be a contributor too. So if something happens in your organization, it's very important that you're feeding it through to the authorities who can feed it through, and that other people get the benefit of that. Could we go on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So what does threat intelligence cover for industrial control systems? Well, first thing is malware analysis and countermeasures, and that would very much include things that are targeted specifically at industrial control systems. Also cyber reconnaissance, and this would be looking around kind of reports on cybercrime, hacktivist activity, and also kind of being predictive about things that were going to happen. Like, I have to laugh, like one of my kids was doing the Leaving Cert and getting his results, and coming from the background I said to him, you make sure you get your connection 15 minutes beforehand, so that if they do have a lack of bandwidth, that you've got your connection open and you're not going to lose it, so that you can get your results. And lo and behold, he got his results at 5 to 9, and all his friends were getting them at 10 past and 9 because the connections weren't there. So that kind of reconnaissance thing about being aware of what's going on, being aware of what the impacts of that could be, are very important, and having the intelligence and the threat intelligence and information around that is good. The vulnerability management piece around looking at and being aware through the different CVEs, through the different certs, and making sure that you've got that information fed into you about what's relevant and what's new. And again, with industrial control systems, this life cycle tends to be a little slower than we would see with the typical IT systems. Making sure that you're aware of the geopolitical and strategic threats, looking at what state actors are doing, and also evaluating the risks for your particular organization about, you know, what could you be exposed to. Like there's always a temptation in Ireland to kind of say, well, who's going to be interested in this kind of small country on the side of Europe? But that is often not the case, because we do see threat actors often using us as a testing ground when they're testing out malware to hit other countries. And then also we're part of greater units, you know, in relation to Europe kind of, and our different alliances that we have kind of globally at a political kind of level, which can make us vulnerable to being used as an attack ground for industrial control systems. And then also looking at the targeted attacks and the analysis in relation to those, and making sure that, you know, whatever systems you have in your organization, whatever industrial control systems, that you're familiar with who else has them and who has the threat intelligence that could link through to you that will be relevant for your organization. If we could go on to the next slide, please. Thanks, Owen. So this is an example of IDEFENSE is a section within Accenture where, let's say, in between the UK and Ireland, we've got about 100 threat intelligence analysts who are working day to day, pulling up different types of information. And this is the type of information that can be pulled from the dark web about what's happening, and which can be purchased. So these are, you know, on the right-hand side, these are the sort of ads that you'd be looking at to say, you know, we've got access to a particular organization, you can buy it for this. So this is where attackers are going out, they're breaking the door down for you, and they're saying the door is open in such and such a place, I will tell you where it is, and you can utilize that if you pay me in Bitcoin, and I can go and kind of get in as well. And then on the left hand side there, there's an example of some leaked credentials, which would typically, you know, when they're being advertised for sale, they'd be blacked out, but they're proving that they've actually got them. And these are things that you could purchase to allow you to get access to different people's organizations. So this is the type of threat intelligence reporting that we would generally see kind of being pulled together. And I suppose this is more threat information, but again, you know, you would need to look at it and see, is it relevant to your organization, particularly if credentials or access to your organization was actually for sale on the dark web, then it's going to be very relevant for you. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So I wanted to kind of just finish out kind of giving you a few examples of some things that have happened and some things that we're aware of that have happened in the renewable sector and in other sectors where industrial control systems have been attacked. So there's one incident there of a denial of service that happened on a wind farm. Basically, the attackers were aware of a known vulnerability in their firewalls, so they, you know, managed to work out what type of firewalls they had, and then they were able to trigger 5-minute outages against these firewalls, which left the wind farms pretty much exposed from a control perspective as to what was happening. And any of you who are actually working in industrial control systems would know that not being able to control something for 5 minutes, you're relying on safety mechanisms then as opposed to control mechanisms, which is not a state that you want to be in. We're also seeing ransomware start to drift into the industrial control system world. And again, a lot of people kind of think, oh, you know, my network's segregated, I'm safe, it's fine. But this is often not the case. It is easy for people to find out what connections you have. People typically have connections, you know, for billing mechanisms, for interconnectivity to allow them to do upgrades. And once an attacker figures out what they are, they can get into your systems and your industrial control systems that way. So we have seen incidences of the Econ Snake ransomware going on into ICS systems. It attacks kind of processes, kind of in SCADA systems, gets in, encrypts the underlying system. And again, you know, because people tend to, there's not as much movement and change in industrial control systems. They're not dynamic the way we would see with our IT systems. So updates aren't as frequent, and therefore people tend to presume that backups don't need to be as frequent as well. So sometimes people are harder hit when they're hit with ransomware on their industrial control systems, because it's harder to get back up and running. They're going back to maybe a system that might have been designed 5 or 10 years ago, mightn't have had a lot of updates done to it since. And so it's kind of, does anyone know where the backup is for that, or what's our, you know, our disaster recovery plan for this system, and they're often not as, in my experience, they're often not as good and as clean as they would be in the IT world. So getting hit with ransomware on ICS systems tends to be a much bigger deal. And again, you know, you're losing your SCADA systems, you're losing your historians, you're losing things that you really need to operate the systems and to intervene if something is going wrong. Again, you know, I alluded to earlier kind of around the threat actors that we're seeing in this space. There tend to be a lot of state actors. A lot of the activity tends to be of the low and slow variety, where they're going in quietly onto the systems, they're getting in there, they're sitting in wait, they might be using you as a test bed for something else. But it's often harder to view these systems, and people don't tend to have the same level of monitoring on their industrial control systems as they might have on their IT systems, so it's harder for them to pick up on what's going on. Therefore, having the threat intelligence and this data to tell you where you might be vulnerable, where you need to shore up your holes, is even more important in the industrial control system environment. Now, and I think I've probably gone way over time here, so on that note, I'm going to be quiet and hand back to Emer, and thank you very much for listening to me, everybody.
Thanks so much, Jackie, and you were almost spot on time, so thank you. And it's great, I think, and it's great to have, I suppose, an overview for the audience here of threat intel as it relates to ICS, as you spoke about hardware and software. I think we've a breadth there to open up for discussion. So for the attendees, thank you for taking the time to respond to our survey as part of the registration for the event. Based on the responses that we had in by Sunday, we've observed that about 60% of attendees rated themselves as kind of a beginner when it relates to threat intelligence. A further 32% of you rated yourselves as intermediate level knowledge in threat intel, and then the remaining 8% would rate themselves as advanced. So I suppose the top areas of interest were around examples of customer or bespoke developed solutions used to gather threat intel, looking at commercial threat intel platforms available and how they are used, information resources used to stay current on threat intel, the latest product development, we'll say example using machine learning to gather threat intel. So there's been, I think some of these topics have been covered in the presentation this morning, but look, to facilitate further discussion on the topic, I'm going to hand over to Andy now, and do encourage participation from the audience via chat. Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emer. Very first, I want to say thank you to everybody staying on. This is a relatively long webinar, and we have actually attendance still all in, which is speaking for all the speakers beforehand. Thank you for that. I think it was very interesting, from laser beams shooting at ships to get threat intelligence, how to actually building a bespoke platform and using that in the case of VMware, for example, which was very interesting, but also a dear subject to myself, OT protection and infrastructures that are outside of the IT realm. So really great stuff. But I think because we have a lot of beginners here, the first and foremost question I think we should define is, because everybody speaks around it a little bit, but nobody really went in and said, like, okay, what is threat intelligence? Now, SmartTech 24/7, that's my organization, and we use threat intelligence as actionable information that we can use for our customers. But one of our panelists.
So just to finish up, thanks very much to all of our speakers again, especially to Emer for organising and moderating the session. Of course, a special thanks to the attendees, you for joining us this morning. We know there's a lot of online meetings going on, so we appreciate you giving up your time to join us. They don't replace physical meetings, but I hope that this will be the start of further sessions around this topic. So if you'd like to participate or contribute to further meetings, or if you have any feedback, just get in touch with me. We'll also send out slide decks after and collect some of the suggestions from our panelists maybe for relevant resources. Just to give you an update on Cyber Ireland news as well, in July and August we conducted the first cyber skills survey to provide better data to understand the current cyber labour market in Ireland. So we're currently going through the results of this, and we'll be inviting any companies that participated in it to a briefing to input into the recommendations. Then for Cyber Security Month, we have a couple of activities coming up. So we're looking to promote all relevant cybersecurity activities during October from companies and organisations across Ireland. We'll have a series of events for Cyber Ireland members, so keep an eye on the upcoming newsletters and the events page. We're going to be promoting Ireland's cybersecurity sector and its importance to the economy as well, and also promoting cybersecurity among businesses and the general public, providing relevant resources and sharing good practices from our members. So if your organisation is planning an event, any type of activity related to Cybersecurity Month, or maybe you have some free resources that would benefit businesses or the public, please get in touch with us and send that on, and we'll put it up on our webpage. We also have another activity from Cyber Women Ireland, which are launching their Inspire programme. So a mentoring scheme to encourage more women into the industry and create opportunities for those wishing to progress their careers. The programme is going to kick off in October for 3 months, but there's going to be an information webinar which is taking place next Monday, so that's Monday the 14th of September. And we're looking for a broad range of mentors from industry to get involved, as well as any mentees. So you can find out more information on the Cyber Ireland website and register for that webinar on the 14th as well. Then finally, you might have seen that we recently launched our cluster membership for 2020 and 2021. So we're now asking all current and future Cyber Ireland members to contribute to the ongoing work of the organisation through a membership fee. I'd just like to thank all of the companies that have signed up to date. And for those that have not, from October, participation in the cluster's activities, attending these events, the chapter meetings, will just be limited to the members only. So for more information on that, just check out our membership section of the website or drop me an email. So that's all for this morning. Thanks very much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you at the next chapter meeting.